My son, Michael, sat across my worn kitchen table, the one where I'd helped him with countless homework assignments and bandaged an equal number of scraped knees, his eyes avoiding mine as he delivered the carefully rehearsed lines. He told me it was time to let go. He meant the house, of course, this sturdy, slightly rambling place that had sheltered our family for over 40 years, the repository of my life with his father, every joy, every sorrow etched into its very walls. He and his ever-so-practical wife, Brenda, had decided my continued presence here, in this house that was mine, legally and emotionally, was an impediment to their grand, modern vision for their future. They spoke of downsizing me, of finding a more manageable little flat, a sensible solution for a woman of my years, as if I were a piece of outdated furniture to be conveniently stored away. He painted it as an act of kindness, a release from the burdens of homeownership, his voice smooth with a practiced concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. He thought I'd nod, perhaps shed a few sentimental tears, and then dutifully sign the papers they'd so thoughtfully prepared, papers that would transfer my life's anchor into their eager hands. He thought letting go of the house was just a matter of practicality, a sensible step for an aging mother. What Michael, in his youthful arrogance and Brenda in her sharp-edged ambition, failed to understand was that when you push a mother too far, when you take her sacrifices not just for granted but as your inherent due, when you attempt to erase her from the very fabric of her own existence, she might indeed decide to let go. But not of her home, not of her memories, not of her dignity. Oh no, I decided, in that quiet, sun-dappled kitchen, with the scent of lemon polish still lingering in the air from my morning's work, that it was time to let go of him. They wanted the house so badly, this vessel of my history. They would learn, in due course, that some things cannot be claimed, only earned, and that the quietest woman in the room often possesses the most unyielding resolve. My memories of this house are not just fleeting images, they are the very sinew of my being. I remember the day Samuel, my late husband, carried me over the threshold, a giggling, blushing bride, the scent of fresh paint still sharp in the air. We'd poured every penny we had, every ounce of our youthful optimism, into this place. We'd painted these walls ourselves, late into the night, fueled by lukewarm coffee and shared dreams. Samuel had planted the old oak tree in the backyard the day Michael was born, its branches now a sprawling canopy, a silent testament to the passage of time, to the roots we had laid down here. Every creak of the floorboards, every worn patch on the banister, whispered a story. This was where Michael took his first steps, his chubby legs wobbling across this very kitchen floor. This was where he'd built magnificent Lego castles, where he'd hidden from thunderstorms under the big mahogany table in the dining room, Samuel patiently reading to him until the fear subsided. I remembered the countless nights I'd sat in the rocking chair in his small bedroom, humming lullabies, my heart overflowing with a love so fierce it felt tangible. And the sacrifices, oh, the sacrifices. When Samuel fell ill, the medical bills mounted like an insurmountable Everest. Michael was in college then, full of youthful ambition, oblivious to the storm clouds gathering over our finances. I took on extra shifts at the library, my eyesight straining under the dim lights, my body aching with a weariness that went bone deep. I sold my mother's pearls, a piece of jewelry I'd treasured, to cover a particularly large hospital bill, telling Samuel I'd simply misplaced them. He'd never known. I'd wanted to shield him, to shield Michael, from the harsh realities. This house, during those dark years, became my fortress, the one stable thing in a world that felt like it was crumbling around me. After Samuel passed, the silence in these rooms was deafening. Michael, already launched into his own life, his visits becoming less frequent, his calls shorter, more perfunctory. Brenda, when she entered the picture, seemed to view me and this house as relics of a bygone era, quaint perhaps, but ultimately, an encumbrance. Her polite smiles never quite reached her eyes, her compliments about my baking or my garden always felt a little too forced, a little too practiced. I wasn't blind. I saw the way her gaze would sweep over my cherished, if slightly worn, possessions, a subtle cataloging, an almost imperceptible calculation. But I held my tongue, told myself I was being uncharitable, that I should give her time, give them space. A mother's love, I've learned, can be a stubborn, foolish thing, blinding you to truths you'd rather not see. Now, sitting at that kitchen table, the scent of Michael's expensive cologne a jarring intrusion in the familiar comfort of my home, listening to him outline their sensible solution for my future, a future they had so thoughtfully designed without my input, a cold, hard anger began to coalesce in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't just about the house. It was about the casual dismissal of my life, my history, my very being. They wanted to erase me, to tidy me away, so they could build their shiny, new future on the foundations I had laid with my own blood, sweat, and tears. The sheer, unadulterated entitlement of it was breathtaking. "It's a big place for one person, Mom," Michael had said, his voice laced with that false sympathy that grated on my nerves. "All the upkeep, the worry. Brenda and we've been thinking, a nice little apartment, closer to us, perhaps? We could help you find something more appropriate." "More appropriate for whom, Michael?" I'd wanted to scream. "More appropriate for your ambitions? For Brenda's social standing?" But I'd said nothing, just listened, my mind a whirlwind of a lifetime's worth of memories, of sacrifices, of a love that now felt like a fool's investment. He'd continued, oblivious, or perhaps indifferent, to the storm brewing behind my carefully composed expression, outlining their plans for my house, the renovations, the open-plan living space, the sleek, minimalist aesthetic that would undoubtedly obliterate every trace of Samuel, of me, of the life we had built here. It was in that moment, listening to him so casually, so callously, dismantle my life, that the decision took root. He wanted me to let go. Fine, I would, but not in the way he envisioned. Not in a million years. The letting go would be far more profound, far more final, than he could ever imagine. Brenda arrived a few days after Michael's initial salvo, armed with a stack of glossy brochures showcasing various senior living communities. Her smile was dazzlingly insincere, her eyes flicking around my living room with an expression that hovered somewhere between pity and avarice. "Evelyn, dear," she began, her voice a honeyed confection of false concern, "Michael told me you had a good chat. We're just so keen to help you transition smoothly. Look at this one." She thrust a brochure under my nose, a picture of beaming, silver-haired seniors engaged in a suspiciously vigorous game of lawn bowls. "It has a heated pool, and a craft room. You'd make so many new friends." I looked at the brochure, then at Brenda. The craft room, I noted with a flicker of amusement, featured a woman enthusiastically gluing glitter onto a pine cone. Was this their vision for my golden years? Glitter and communal bingo? "It's very vibrant, Brenda," I said, my voice carefully neutral, "but I'm quite content here. My friends are here, my garden, my memories." Brenda's smile wavered, just for a fraction of a second. "Of course, dear, but we have to be practical, don't we? This house, it's an asset, a very valuable asset, just sitting here, not really working for anyone." Not working for them, she meant. The subtext was as subtle as a sledgehammer. "Samuel and I worked very hard for this asset, Brenda," I said, my gaze steady. "It has worked very well for me, providing shelter, comfort, and a lifetime of happiness." She patted my hand, a gesture meant to be comforting but felt condescending. "And that's wonderful, Evelyn. But times change. Needs change. Michael and we have so many plans, for our future, for this house. It has such potential, with a little updating, a euphemism for gutting, for erasing every trace of the life Samuel and I had built." I remembered the day Michael brought Brenda home to meet me for the first time. She'd surveyed my home with that same appraising look, her eyes lingering on the slightly faded wallpaper in the dining room, the comfortable, if not fashionable, chintz armchair Samuel had loved. Her compliments had been carefully chosen, polite but non-committal. I'd sensed even then a disconnect, a fundamental difference in values, but I'd tried to be welcoming, for Michael's sake. Now, that polite veneer was wearing thin, revealing the steely ambition beneath. She launched into a detailed, unsolicited monologue about their vision for the house. They'd knocked down the wall between the kitchen and dining room, creating a vast, open-plan entertaining space. The garden, my beloved, rambling cottage garden, would be paved over for a low-maintenance patio and a built-in barbecue. My bedroom, with its view of the old oak tree, would become a home office for David. And my little sewing room, my sanctuary, would be transformed into a nursery, for when the time comes, she'd added with a coy smile, as if the prospect of a grandchild would be enough to make me sign away my home. Each proposed improvement felt like a fresh stab, a deliberate erasure of my existence. I listened in silence, my heart growing colder with each word. They weren't just talking about renovations, they were talking about obliteration. They saw not a home filled with love and memories, but a shell, a blank canvas onto which they could project their own aspirations. The conversation, if it could be called that, was a masterclass in manipulation. Brenda artfully wove together threads of concern for my well-being, practical considerations about property values, and subtle hints about their own financial stretchedness. Michael, when he joined the conversation later that evening, played his part, echoing Brenda's points, his brow furrowed with feigned worry about my ability to cope. "We just want you to be comfortable, Mom," he'd said, his hand resting briefly, unconvincingly, on my shoulder. "And honestly, this place, it's too much for you now. Let us take the burden." The burden. My home, my sanctuary, reduced to a burden. The irony was almost too much to bear. The only burden I felt was the suffocating weight of their expectations, their entitlement, their profound, shocking lack of empathy. I remembered a conversation with Samuel, years ago, when Michael was a teenager, already showing signs of a certain self-centeredness. "He'll learn, Evie," Samuel had said, his voice gentle. "Life has a way of teaching us the lessons we need, sometimes the hard way." I wondered now if Samuel had foreseen this moment where his son would stand before me, asking me to dismantle the very life his father had worked so hard to build. That night, after they'd finally left, their brochures scattered on my coffee table like insidious propaganda, I couldn't sleep. I wandered through the darkened rooms, my hand trailing along familiar walls, a lifetime of memory swirling around me. The scent of Samuel's pipe tobacco, faint but still discernible in the study, the notch on the kitchen doorframe where we'd marked Michael's height each year, the worn patch on the arm of my reading chair. These weren't just things, they were pieces of my soul, and they wanted me to let them go, to pack them away, to reduce them to, what? A few sentimental trinkets in a sterile, anonymous apartment? The anger, cold and sharp, was back, but this time it was accompanied by a steely resolve. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my quiet nature for weakness, my love for Michael as a tool to be exploited. They were about to learn that this old woman, this burden, still had a few surprises left, and the first surprise would be that I wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. Not on their terms. The pressure, after Brenda's brochure offensive, didn't lessen, it merely changed tactics. Michael began to call more frequently, his tone a careful blend of filial concern and gentle prodding. "Just checking in, Mom. How are you feeling today? Did you have a chance to look at those lovely places Brenda found for you? Some of them have really wonderful social programs, you know, keep you active." Active, as if I spent my days moldering in a darkened room. I tended my garden, I volunteered at the local library, I had my book club, my weekly tea with Mrs. Henderson. My life was quiet, yes, but it was full. Fuller, perhaps, than Michael, with his relentless pursuit of the next promotion, the next acquisition, could ever comprehend. "I'm perfectly active, Michael, thank you," I'd reply, my voice polite but cool, "and I'm still considering my options." "Of course, Mom, no rush. We just want what's best for you." That phrase, "what's best for you," became their mantra, a verbal battering ram designed to wear down my resistance. It was always delivered with such earnest conviction, as if they genuinely believed that dispossessing me of my home, my autonomy, was an act of profound benevolence. Brenda, for her part, took to dropping by unannounced, often with a small, usually unwanted, offering, a pot of lukewarm soup, a wilting bunch of flowers, a magazine filled with articles about graceful aging. These visits were always accompanied by a fresh barrage of subtle persuasion. "Oh, Evelyn, that loose step on the porch, you really must be careful. It's these little things, you see, that can lead to nasty falls. A modern apartment, all on one level, would be so much safer." Or, "I was just reading about property taxes going up in this neighborhood. Such a worry for someone on a fixed income. Selling now, while the market is strong, would be the sensible thing, wouldn't it?" Sensible for whom, Brenda? My internal monologue was becoming increasingly sarcastic. Each visit left me feeling more beleaguered, more determined. Their persistence was astounding. They seemed utterly incapable of understanding, or perhaps unwilling to accept, that my answer might be no. It was as if my desires, my attachments, my very right to choose, were irrelevant in the face of their grand plan. I started to feel like a fortress under siege, their polite inquiries and feigned concerns the cleverly disguised reconnaissance missions of an invading army. The emotional toll was significant. I found myself replaying conversations, analyzing their words, searching for an ounce of genuine affection, of selfless concern. There was none to be found. It was all about the house, the asset, the potential windfall. Their eyes, when they looked at me, seemed to see not a mother, but an obstacle that needed to be gently, but firmly, removed. The memories of Samuel, always a comfort, now became a source of strength. What would he have done? What would he have said? Samuel, with his quiet integrity, his fierce love for our home, our life. He would never have stood for this. He would have seen through their charade in an instant. He would have told them, in his calm, unwavering way, to respect their mother, to honor her wishes. But Samuel was gone, and I had to find that strength within myself. One afternoon, Brenda brought over a stack of legal-looking documents. "Just some preliminary paperwork, Evelyn," she said, her voice a little too casual. "Michael thought it would be good to have it ready, for when you decide. It just outlines the transfer process, makes everything clear and straightforward." She placed the papers on my kitchen table, their stark white a glaring intrusion in the familiar warmth of the room. I stared at them as if they were venomous snakes. This was it. The tangible evidence of their intentions, their cold, calculated plan to dispossess me. I'll look them over, Brenda, I said, my voice barely a whisper. After she left, I picked up the documents, my hands trembling. It was all there, in black and white, deeds of transfer, sale agreements, power of attorney forms. They hadn't just been talking. They'd been actively preparing for my capitulation. The arrogance of it, the sheer, unadulterated nerve, took my breath away. That was the moment the last vestiges of my maternal indulgence, my willingness to give them the benefit of the doubt, crumbled into dust. This wasn't just about a house anymore. This was about my dignity, my autonomy, my right to live out my days in peace, in the home I loved, surrounded by the memories that sustained me. They wanted me to sign away my life. They wanted me to let go. And I would, but it would be on my terms. And it would be them, not my home, that I would be letting go of. The fight, I realized, had truly begun. And I, Evelyn Miller, a quiet widow whom they had so grievously underestimated, was ready for it. The sight of those legal papers on my kitchen table acted as a powerful clarifying agent. All the polite prevarications, the honeyed concerns, the carefully constructed arguments about my well-being, they all dissolved, revealing the stark, grasping reality of their intentions. They weren't just hoping I'd move. They were actively planning my removal, drafting the instruments of my dispossession before I'd even agreed to entertain the notion. That evening, after a solitary, reflective dinner, I did something I hadn't done in years. I retrieved the old, slightly battered address book Samuel and I had kept, its pages filled with the faded ink of half-forgotten names and numbers. I was looking for one in particular, Patricia Evans, or Patty, as I'd known her. She'd been a bright, tenacious young lawyer who had helped Samuel with some business contracts a lifetime ago. She'd been sharp as a tack then, with a fierce sense of justice and a no-nonsense approach that Samuel had greatly admired. If anyone could offer me sound, unbiased advice, it was Patty. I found her number, now listed under Patricia Evans, attorney at law, with an office address downtown. My hand hesitated over the phone. Was I overreacting? Was I about to escalate a family disagreement into a legal battle? But the image of those papers, so clinical, so final, lying on my welcoming, worn kitchen table, spurred me on. This was already more than a disagreement, it was an attempted usurpation. Patricia answered on the second ring, her voice still carrying that familiar blend of warmth and professionalism. Patricia Evans speaking. Patricia, I began, it's Evelyn Miller, Samuel Miller's widow. I don't know if you remember me. Evelyn, of course, I remember you. And dear Samuel, it's been too long. How are you? Her genuine warmth was a balm. I briefly explained my situation, the pressure from Michael and Brenda, the appearance of the unsolicited legal documents. I didn't need to embellish, the facts spoke for themselves. Patricia listened patiently, interjecting only with a sharp intake of breath or a muttered, the nerve of some people. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. Then, Patricia said, her voice firm, Evelyn, you need to understand your rights here. That house is yours. Unless you are deemed mentally incompetent, which, from this conversation, you most certainly are not, no one can force you to sign anything or to leave your home. Those papers Brenda brought over? They're meaningless without your willing, informed consent. Her words were like a lifeline. For weeks, I'd felt myself slowly drowning in a sea of their manipulative rhetoric. Patricia's clarity, her straightforward assertion of my rights, was a breath of fresh air. They make it sound so reasonable, I said, as if they're doing me a favor. That, Evelyn, Patricia said, a hint of steel in her voice, is classic emotional manipulation, often a precursor to elder financial abuse. They're trying to make you doubt yourself, to make you feel like a burden, so you'll acquiesce to their wishes. Don't fall for it. We talked for nearly an hour. Patricia advised me not to sign anything, under any circumstances, without consulting her first. She suggested I gather any documents I had relating to the house, the deed, mortgage papers, loan paid off, thankfully, property tax receipts, just to have everything in order. She also gently broached the subject of my will. Have you updated it recently, Evelyn? Given the current circumstances, it might be wise to ensure your wishes are very clearly and legally documented. I hadn't thought about my will in years. It had been drafted when Samuel was still alive, a simple document leaving everything to each other, and then to Michael. The thought of Michael and Brenda inheriting this house, this repository of my life with Samuel, after their recent behavior, now filled me with a cold dread. No, I said, I haven't. It names Michael as the sole beneficiary. Patricia was silent for a moment. Well, she said finally, that is certainly something we can address, if you wish. Your will is your final word, Evelyn. It should reflect your true desires, not just familial obligation, especially when that obligation is being so egregiously abused. Her words resonated deeply. My true desires. What were they? Beyond simply staying in my home, what did I want my legacy to be? The conversation with Patricia was a turning point. It armed me not just with legal knowledge, but with a renewed sense of my own agency. I was not a helpless old woman to be managed and manipulated. I was Evelyn Miller, mistress of my own home, architect of my own life, and now, the decider of my own legacy. The next day, I retrieved the old metal strongbox from the back of my closet. Inside, amongst Samuel's war medals and my mother's lace wedding veil, were the deeds to the house, the final mortgage satisfaction letter, years of carefully filed tax receipts. Holding those documents in my hands, tangible proof of a lifetime of hard work and careful stewardship, I felt a surge of quiet strength. This was mine, earned, paid for, and no one, not even my own son, was going to take it from me through deceit and emotional blackmail. The path ahead was clear. I would not be signing Brenda's preliminary paperwork. I would be drafting some of my own. And Michael and Brenda were about to discover that the sensible solution they'd envisioned for me was not the solution I would be choosing for myself. The aftermath of my call with Patricia Evans was a subtle but significant shift in my demeanor, a quiet girding of my emotional loins. I no longer felt like a passive recipient of Michael and Brenda's machinations. I felt like a player in my own right, armed with knowledge and a dawning sense of my own power. Their visits, which continued, albeit with a slightly more strained air now that their preliminary paperwork lay untouched and unremarked upon on my kitchen counter, became a sort of grimly fascinating study in human avarice. They'd circle the topic of the house, of my future, like well-fed sharks still sensing a potential meal. Michael took to reminiscing, a tactic I hadn't seen from him before. Remember that Christmas, Mom, when Dad bought me that red bicycle? I rode it right here in this kitchen, nearly knocked over the tree. He'd chuckle, his eyes flicking towards me, gauging my reaction. Was this an attempt to evoke sentimental attachment to him, to remind me of happier times, to soften me up? Or was it a more insidious reminder that this house held his memories too, thereby strengthening his perceived claim to it? Brenda, on the other hand, ramped up the concern for my well-being, her voice dripping with a solicitude that was almost insulting. Evelyn, dear, I noticed you were a little unsteady on your feet this morning. Are you sure you're managing the stairs all right? We really do worry about you here, all alone. All alone. The phrase was a constant refrain, designed, I was sure, to make me feel vulnerable, isolated, and therefore more susceptible to their helpful suggestions. Little did they know, I wasn't alone. I had Patricia Evans, a formidable ally, just a phone call away. And I had my own strengthening resolve, a companion more steadfast than they could ever imagine. I began to subtly push back, no longer just a passive listener. When Michael mentioned the red bicycle, I'd smiled. Yes, dear, I remember. Your father had to work 3 overtime shifts to afford that bicycle. He wanted you to have the best, always. A flicker of something, annoyance, discomfort, crossed Michael's face before he quickly changed the subject. When Brenda fretted about the stairs, I'd replied brightly, oh, the stairs are wonderful exercise, dear. Keeps me spry. And Dr. Peterson says I'm fit as a fiddle. Her smile tightened. They weren't used to me asserting myself, even in these small ways. They were used to my quiet acquiescence, my maternal tendency to smooth things over, to avoid conflict. This new, slightly more assertive Evelyn seemed to disconcert them. During this period, I also began to actively consider Patricia's suggestion about my will. The thought of Michael and Brenda inheriting this house, this haven of my life with Samuel, after their egregious behavior, became increasingly abhorrent. It wasn't about punishing Michael, not entirely. It was about justice. It was about ensuring that my life's work, the fruits of Samuel's labor and my own, went to someone, or something, that deserved it, that would honor its true value. I thought about my younger sister's granddaughter, Sarah, a sweet, hard-working young woman struggling to raise 2 small children on her own after her husband had tragically passed away. She always remembered my birthday, always sent a handwritten Christmas card. Her small kindness is a stark contrast to Michael and Brenda's calculated self-interest. Or perhaps a local charity, one that supported elderly people in need, people who truly were alone and vulnerable, without the resources I possessed. The idea began to take shape, a quiet act of defiance, a final assertion of my own will, in every sense of the word. The preliminary paperwork Brenda had left on my counter became a sort of symbol. I moved it from the kitchen table to the small desk in my sewing room, placing it pointedly under a heavy glass paperweight Samuel had used. It lay there, a silent challenge, a reminder of their intentions, and a testament to my refusal to capitulate. One afternoon, Brenda, noticing the paper still there, remarked, with a forced casualness, "Oh, Evelyn, have you had a chance to look over those forms yet? No rush, of course, but our lawyer said it's always best to get these things sorted sooner rather than later. I'm giving them the consideration they deserve, Brenda, I replied, my voice serene. And I was considering them as evidence of their profound disrespect, their grasping entitlement. I was considering them as the catalyst for my own quiet revolution. The game had changed. They just didn't realize it yet. They were still playing by their old rules, assuming my maternal love would ultimately make me pliable, make me sacrifice my own needs, my own home, for their desires. They had forgotten, or perhaps never known, that even the deepest well of a mother's love has a bottom, and that when that bottom is scraped by ingratitude and disrespect, something else, something far less yielding, can begin to surface. The quiet hum of my new resolve was almost imperceptible to the outside world, but within the walls of my small house, it was a palpable force. I met with Patricia Evans again, this time in her downtown office, a space that exuded quiet competence and a reassuring sense of order. I brought with me the metal strongbox containing my important documents, and a heart full of a decision that felt both momentous and utterly right. So, Evelyn, Patricia said, after we'd settled in with cups of tea, have you given more thought to your will? I have, Patricia, I replied, my voice clear and firm. I've given it a great deal of thought, and I know exactly what I want to do. I then outlined my intentions. The house, this beloved repository of my life with Samuel, was not to go to Michael, nor were my savings, carefully accumulated over a lifetime of frugal living and prudent investment. Instead, I wanted the bulk of my estate to be divided. A significant portion was to be placed in a trust for my grandniece, Sarah, to help with her children's education and to give her a measure of financial security she so richly deserved but had never expected. Sarah, with her quiet strength and her unwavering kindness, embodied the values I cherished, values that seemed to have entirely bypassed my own son. The remainder, I decided, would go to the local animal shelter, a cause Samuel had always supported. He'd had a soft spot for stray cats and abandoned dogs, often bringing home wounded creatures for me to nurse back to health. The thought of our life savings providing comfort and care to animals in need brought a warm sense of satisfaction, a far cry from the cold dread the thought of Michael and Brenda inheriting it now inspired. Patricia listened intently, her pen flying across her legal pad. She asked pertinent questions, clarified details, ensured my intentions were legally sound and unambiguous. There was no judgment in her eyes, only a professional dedication to executing my wishes. And Michael, she asked finally, what provision, if any, do you wish to make for your son? This was the part one had wrestled with the most. To disinherit one's own child, it felt like a profound, almost unnatural act. But Michael's recent behavior, his blatant disregard for my feelings, his transparent avarice, had irrevocably fractured the bond between us. Michael, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth, will receive $1, a symbolic gesture. Enough to show that he was not forgotten, merely, intentionally excluded from further inheritance due to his actions. Patricia nodded slowly. A common provision in such circumstances, she said. It makes your intentions crystal clear. As she drafted the new will, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. There was sadness, yes, a deep, aching sorrow for the son I had lost, or perhaps, the son I had never truly had. But there was also a profound sense of liberation, of peace. I was no longer bound by a sense of maternal obligation that had become a one-way street. I was free to direct my legacy, my final act of love and stewardship, towards those who embodied the qualities I held dear. The signing of the new will, a few days later, was a quiet, solemn affair. Patricia's secretary and a junior associate acted as witnesses. As my pen moved across the page, I felt the weight of a lifetime's decisions, the echoes of Samuel's love, the sharp sting of Michael's betrayal, and the quiet, steady hum of my own reclaimed dignity. This document, so stark and legalistic, was more than just a disposition of assets. It was a declaration of my values, a testament to my journey from silent endurance to quiet defiance. It was my final word, and it was a word spoken in a voice that was, at long last, entirely my own. After the signing, Patricia walked me to the door. You've done a brave thing, Evelyn, she said, her hand resting briefly on my arm. It takes courage to stand up for yourself, especially against family. It took me a long time to find that courage, Patricia, I replied, but I found it, and it feels right. Walking out into the bright afternoon sunshine, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. The burden of Michael and Brenda's expectations, the weight of their insincere attentions, had been lifted. They could continue their charade, their manipulative games, but they no longer held any power over me, or over my future. My future, and the future of what I left behind, was now firmly and irrevocably, in my own hands. And that, I realized, was the most sensible solution of all. Michael and Brenda, blissfully unaware of the seismic shift that had occurred in my legal affairs, continued their campaign, though their tactics began to show signs of desperation. The polite inquiries about my health morphed into slightly more pointed suggestions about my frailty. The casual mentions of their financial woes became more frequent, more insistent. It was as if they sensed, on some subliminal level, that their window of opportunity was closing, and they needed to ramp up the pressure. One evening, Michael called, his voice tight with a forced urgency. "Mom, Brenda and I have been talking. We found this absolutely perfect little cottage, just outside of town. It's small, manageable, all on one level, and it's available now. We think it would be ideal for you. We could even help you with the move, get you settled in before winter." "That's very proactive of you, Michael," I said, my voice carefully devoid of inflection. "But as I've said, I'm quite happy here." "But Mom," he pressed, a note of exasperation creeping into his tone, "be realistic. This house, it's going to become a millstone around your neck. What if you fall again? What if something happens and you're all alone here? We're just thinking of your safety, your comfort." My safety, my comfort, always framed as their primary concern, yet always inextricably linked to their desire for my house. The hypocrisy was almost breathtaking. "I appreciate your concern, Michael," I said, "but I have made my own arrangements for my safety and comfort, and they do not involve me moving out of my home." There was a frustrated sigh on the other end of the line. "You're being stubborn, Mom. You're not thinking clearly about this." Not thinking clearly, the old, insidious insinuation of senility, of incompetence. It was their go-to weapon when their more subtle manipulations failed. "On the contrary, Michael," I replied, my voice like ice, "I believe I am thinking more clearly than I have in a very long time, and my decision is final. I am not selling my house. I am not moving, and I would appreciate it if you and Brenda would respect that." I hung up before he could reply, my hand trembling slightly, not with fear, but with a surge of righteous anger. The audacity of it, the sheer, unadulterated gall, still had the power to shock me. But beneath the anger, there was also a quiet sense of triumph. I had stood my ground. I had spoken my truth, and it felt good. Brenda, predictably, tried a different tack. She appeared on my doorstep a few days later, her eyes red-rimmed, a picture of wounded maternal solicitude. "Evelyn," she began, her voice choked with emotion, "Michael is so upset. He feels like you don't trust him, like you don't appreciate all he's trying to do for you. He loves you so much, you know. This is hurting him terribly." The performance was almost Oscar-worthy. If I hadn't known better, I might almost have been swayed, but I did know better. I knew that the only thing hurting Michael was the dawning realization that his carefully laid plans were going awry. "Brenda," I said, my voice gentle but firm, "Michael's feelings are his own to manage. My decisions are based on what I believe is right for me, and for the legacy Samuel and I built together. If Michael truly loves me, he will respect those decisions, even if he doesn't agree with them." Her facade crumbled. "But the house, Evelyn, it's rightfully Michael's inheritance. You can't just give it away to strangers, or to cats." Mrs. Henderson, it seemed, had been gossiping again, though her information about the animal shelter was, at least, accurate. "This house, Brenda," I corrected, "is mine. Mine to live in, mine to cherish, and mine to bequeath as I see fit. And I have made my choices. Choices that reflect my values, not your expectations." She stared at me, speechless for once, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed off, the click of her expensive heels on my garden path like angry punctuation marks. That was the last I saw of them for several weeks. The phone call stopped. The unannounced visits ceased. A blessed, peaceful silence descended upon my little house. It was a silence filled not with loneliness, but with a quiet sense of victory. I had faced them down, and I had won. Not the house, not yet, but something far more valuable, my own peace of mind, my own self-respect. My quiet revolution was complete. The battle was over. All that remained was to live out the consequences, and to ensure that my final act, my will, would speak my truth long after I was gone. The ensuing silence from Michael and Brenda was, at first, a profound relief. The cessation of their manipulative visits and guilt-inducing phone calls allowed a sense of normalcy to return to my days. I tended my garden, attended my book club, and enjoyed quiet evenings with Samuel's old records playing softly on the gramophone. The weight of their expectations, which had been a constant, oppressive presence, had lifted, and I felt a lightness, a freedom, I hadn't experienced in years. But as weeks turned into months, another, more insidious feeling began to creep in, a deep, abiding sorrow. This was my son, my only child, and our relationship, already strained, now seemed to be irrevocably severed. There were no birthday cards, no Christmas greetings, not even a perfunctory call on Mother's Day. It was as if I had ceased to exist for them, erased from their lives as cleanly as they had hoped to erase me from my home. Patricia Evans, during one of our now infrequent but always reassuring check-in calls, sensed my melancholy. "It's a natural grief, Evelyn," she said, her voice kind. "You're mourning the relationship you wished you had, the son you hoped he would be. It's all right to feel that sadness, but don't let it undermine the rightness of your decision." Her words, as always, were a comfort. She was right. My decision regarding the will, regarding my legacy, was sound. It was a reflection of my values, a testament to my hard-won independence. But the mother in me still ached for the lost connection, however flawed it had been. One blustery autumn afternoon, nearly a year after our last confrontation, I received an unexpected letter. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar. Curious, I opened it. It was from Sarah, my grandniece, the young woman I had named as a primary beneficiary in my new will. She wrote to thank me for a small birthday check I had sent her children, a gesture I made every year, a small token of familial connection. But her letter went further. "Dear Aunt Evelyn," it read, "thank you so much for remembering Lily and Tom on their birthdays. They were so thrilled with the books. But more than that, I wanted to thank you for just being you. My grandmother, your sister, always spoke of you with such love and admiration. She told me stories of your kindness, your strength, your quiet resilience. In a world that often feels so loud and grasping, your steadfastness has always been an inspiration to me, even from afar. I hope you are well. With much love, Sarah." Tears welled in my eyes as I read her words. Kindness, strength, resilience, values my own son seemed to have forgotten, or perhaps never truly learned. Sarah's letter, so simple, so sincere, was a balm to my wounded heart. It was a reminder that true family connection isn't always about blood proximity, but about shared values, about mutual respect, about a love that doesn't demand, but simply is. It strengthened my resolve. My legacy, I knew, was going to the right place. It would support a young woman who embodied the very qualities I cherished, a woman who understood the meaning of gratitude, of quiet dignity. The thought brought a measure of peace that had been eluding me. The silence from Michael and Brenda continued. I heard snippets of news, occasionally, through Mrs. Henderson, who, despite her gossipy nature, had a good heart and kept a concerned eye on me. Michael, it seemed, had received a promotion, and they had bought a larger, more ostentatious house in a newer, more fashionable suburb. They were, by all outward appearances, thriving. And yet, I couldn't help but wonder if their shiny new life felt a little hollow, if the absence of genuine familial connection left a void that no amount of material success could fill. For myself, I found a quiet contentment in my small house, surrounded by Samuel's memories, my garden, my books. My life was not grand, not exciting in the way the world often defines those terms. But it was mine. It was authentic, and it was lived on my own terms. The final chapter was yet to be written, of course. But I knew now, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that when it was, it would be a story of strength, of integrity, and of a quiet, enduring love that had finally found its rightful recipients. The letting go had been painful, yes. But in letting go of a toxic, unreciprocating relationship, I had, in a strange and unexpected way, found myself. The call from the hospital came on a crisp March morning, the kind of day that hints at spring but still carries the lingering chill of winter. It was Patricia Evans, her voice unusually subdued. "Evelyn," she said, "I'm afraid I have some difficult news. It's about Michael." My heart constricted. Despite everything, despite the anger, the disappointment, the profound sense of betrayal, he was still my son. "What is it, Patricia?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "There's been an accident," she said gently. "A car accident. Michael didn't make it. Brenda is in critical condition." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Michael, gone. It was a possibility I had never truly contemplated, not even in the darkest depths of my anger. The finality of it was a stunning, brutal blow. The subsequent days were a blur of shock and a grief so profound, so complex, it felt like I was drowning. Patricia handled everything, of course, with her customary efficiency and compassion. She dealt with the hospital, the police, the funeral arrangements. I was in no state to do so. Brenda, miraculously, survived, though her recovery would be long and arduous. She had sustained multiple injuries, and the doctors were unsure about the extent of any long-term damage. The funeral was a small, somber affair. I sat in the front pew, a strange, numb detachment enveloping me. Brenda, heavily sedated and confined to a wheelchair, was there, her face pale and drawn, her eyes vacant. Her parents, stiff and remote, offered me perfunctory condolences. There were a few of Michael's colleagues, a handful of distant relatives. It was a sparse gathering for a man who had always seemed so focused on accumulating, on achieving, on projecting an image of success. After the service, Patricia drove me home. "Are you all right, Evelyn?" she asked, her voice full of concern. "I don't know what I am, Patricia," I whispered. "He was my son, my only child, and despite everything, I loved him." The reading of my will, which under normal circumstances would have occurred after my own passing, now took on a different, more immediate significance. With Michael gone, and Brenda's future uncertain, the disposition of my estate, as outlined in the new will, would proceed. Patricia handled it all with quiet discretion. Sarah, my grandniece, was contacted. She was, as I had expected, utterly overwhelmed, both by the news of Michael's death and by the unexpected inheritance. She called me, her voice choked with tears, expressing her condolences, her gratitude, her disbelief. "Aunt Evelyn," she said, "I don't know what to say. It's too much." "It's what I wanted, Sarah," I said, my voice weak but firm. "It's what Samuel would have wanted. Use it wisely. Build a good life for yourself and your children. Honor the values we cherished." The animal shelter, too, received its bequest, a significant sum that would ensure the care of countless abandoned and mistreated creatures for years to come. There was a small, almost poignant irony in the fact that Michael's actions, his greed and disrespect, had ultimately led to such a significant act of charity, a legacy of kindness he himself had never managed to cultivate. Brenda, upon learning the terms of my will, specifically, the symbolic $1 bequeathed to Michael, and by extension, now to her as his widow, was, according to Patricia, initially furious. There were threats of legal challenges, accusations of manipulation, of my obvious senility. But Patricia, armed with my clear, witnessed declarations and Dr. Peterson's attestations to my sound mind, calmly, firmly, refuted every claim. Eventually, faced with the undeniable legality of my wishes, Brenda's anger subsided into a bitter, resentful acceptance. She had lost her husband, her comfortable lifestyle, and the anticipated inheritance, all in one devastating blow. Her future, once so carefully curated, so aggressively pursued, now lay in ruins. As for me, in the quiet solitude of my little house, surrounded by Samuel's memories, I began the slow, painful process of grieving for my son, the son he was, and the son I had always hoped he would be. There was no triumph in his demise, no satisfaction in Brenda's downfall, only a profound, aching sadness for a life unfulfilled, for a relationship irretrievably broken, not by death, but by choices made long before that fatal accident. My legacy was secure. It would not be one of bitterness or revenge, but one of considered generosity, of quiet strength, of a love that, in the end, found its truest expression not in blind obligation, but in principled action. The letting go had been far more complex, far more painful, than I could ever have imagined. But in the end, it was a letting go that allowed for a different kind of holding on, to my values, to my dignity, to the enduring power of kindness in a world too often consumed by greed.